Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Friday evening rambles. We're doing something a little bit different today simply because we didn't have time this morning with some fridges and stuff being moved around to do the rambles. Would have been crazy inside the store and very loud with everyone doing stuff. So here we are this evening. I'm John Caspian. Today we're going to be talking about post-hype analysis. It's a new thing I want to do a little bit of, simply because there's always hype around new things. So then when you're getting excited for it, you think, this is so amazing. There's always the people, though, that want to wait till a while afterwards to make sure that it's still something that they want after all the hype has died down. So I'm going to show you some examples of some things that I have painted with contrast paints. My most successful things that I probably would do less contrast with. So then, a small amount of contrast maybe is like a base coat, or things that I personally avoid. But again, this is all opinion. And so if you have a particular thing that you like, especially contrast-wise, go for it. Try it out. There's always something for everybody. So let's go ahead and look at our first couple of models here. Number one, I have from the new Warcry set. This is one of the pieces of Ruin right there. Ruined terrain. As you can see, there's some skulls, some vases, and then this little broken pillar. Then we have Bosk from Star Wars Legion. Put him almost entirely with contrast, except for a little parts of the skin which are highlighted with a highlight color. And then finally, this bit right here, which is the wooden stairs from Warcry. So these are the first ones I'm going to show you. So in terms of what I did for the set here for the ruins, I'll show that here in the middle. So then this one I did with Gray Seer. And so the Gray Seer is really good in that it does not care so much about humidity. So while I was in Georgia, I actually had the humidity, I think it was something in the 75% range, and I still was A-okay. And so I put that on as the base coat, and then I put on Basilicum Gray. Then I put as my stuff for the rock area, which it might be a little difficult to see the difference here in the rock in the two. Let me see if I can turn my ISO up on my camera. There we go. That's better. So, as you can see, the rock has a different tone, and what I did there was actually used the Space Wolves Gray, and the Space Wolves Gray I washed down with Agrax Earthshade to give it a more neutral tone that's just a little bit different from Basilicum Gray. Then I used one single wash of the Skeletal Horde on the bones. Let's prop that up here. Yeah, that looks great. Then I did one coat of Flesh Terror's Red for the red vase. And then a Wildwood here, and then a Snakebite Leather for this vase. And so as you can see there, it looks pretty good. What I did was I put an Agrax Earthshade wash over the vases. Gosh, I'm never going to pronounce that the same. And then what that does, that makes them look a little bit more, like that, solid. And so what's cool is, look at that pillar. And look how those highlights pop, and it looks like I've taken a dry brush. But sometimes you get a weird dry brushing effect with dry brush paints, and I didn't get that there. So it looks really good, I think. Very effective. Even looking at it on person, it pops really well. Next up, Bosk. Bam. This boy is great. So then what I did here is on his armor area, Basilicum Gray. And then I put a wash of Nuln Oil Gloss on top of it to make it have a little bit more of a sheen. Then with his leather areas, that is Snakebite Leather. And I might have done 2 washes with that. Then I took the blue, which is Talisar Blue, my favorite of the blues from the contrast line. There we go. And that looks great. And the skin tone, I started off, I think, as a Skeletal Horde. And then I did a sort of a wash, and then I did a couple of other things to it to make it have a little more texture, simply because it takes up so much of the model. But overall, I'd say for a contrast that took me about half an hour of total painting time, I'm very happy with how that turned out. Very, very happy. I think he looks He looks pretty good. I did miss one little bit there on the end of his arm. I had to go back later and get that one there. Let's look now at the stairs. So this is one of the places that contrast really shines. For the amount of time it takes a flight of stairs to paint, typically, you have to base coat it, either an airbrush or you're using a primer with a base tone, or you're having to go over it and then do a wash, and then you have to dry brush and or edge highlight. And when you're doing all those steps, it just takes time, right? Because you're painting. And when I did this, I probably did the entire staircase in 2 to 3 minutes. I use a large base brush, which I'll get to a little bit later. Not base brush, wash brush. And the wash brushes, for me, with the ox hair, especially the Citadel ones, work really well with this contrast paints. And that is your snakebite leather on top of that. I did have another stair that is upstairs that I'm still working on. But let me show you what the Wildwood looks like in comparison. So that is the Wildwood color. As you can see there, there's a nice little highlight. It's a lot more subtle in person. The camera's making it look a ton more highlighted than it is in person. But the snakebite leather looks pretty much spot on. Yep. That's pretty much how it looks in person. But the Wildwood is a little bit more of a rich tone. And you still get those edges peeking out, but not nearly as much as with the snakebite leather. So if you're looking for more of an easy to go for rich tone for the woods, I definitely recommend the snakebite leather. And now let's move on to some Fallout models, because we have those. Bam. Here's a Raider power armor. Not quite done basing it with, because I want to change up some things in the wrists, for instance. But for the power armor on her, I did Creed camo. I think that was Creed camo. Either that or Militarum green. It's one of the two. But either way, it's great. One coat. The wash is, I didn't put it too heavy on, so I did a slight amount of wash. So as you can see there in the recesses, what's cool about it is that I don't have a green wash like from Citadel or anything like that. So it's great to be able to have that included in there. And then on top of the guns, which is very similar to how they are in Fallout 4, snakebite leather. And then I'm going to go in later and add an extra wash, which is going to be amazing. So cool. Let's go to another one. This one is also Basilicum Gray with Talisar Blue and Ardcoat put in for some liquid. There we go. So then that looks a little bit like, I don't know, this weird sludge effect. And it's hard to get it with the angle and the reflectivity of the Ardcoat. But it's this deep, rich blue that you add in with the Ardcoat, almost like you dip it in there, and it kind of spreads out as it hardens. It's a really cool effect. So I look forward to seeing more of what that one does. So then people were talking before about armor. And one of the big things is that the washes work very well on skin tones and surfaces that are not super smooth. So as an example, look here how splotchy that is along the sides of that. But if you look at it on top, especially like right here, it looks great. It looks like a natural dry brush highlight with some wash in there. And so if you're thinking strategically and you want to avoid that splotchy effect, I don't necessarily care as much because that's kind of how I do it with my washes anyway. But if you want to avoid that, I would say avoid these solid areas like these Necrons. So this one I did, as an example, this one I did as an airbrush on top here. And then the rest of it, I did white with a Talisar blue coat. See if I can get in a focus here. Shallow depth of field. So that one turns out okay, but I don't see why you wouldn't just go in and do a solid layer or 2 layers of a blue that you want with a base coat, just because you're not gaining too much from the contrast effect with a large area like that. Same thing kind of with the vehicles. But look at his weapon. That was pretty easy, and that was done with contrast paints. So then that was literally 1 layer of everything, and then there's a tiny bit of, I think, Vallejo brassy brass on there. But the red energy, that is Flesh Terror's red, and then the black is simply Black Templar. And that's pretty decent, considering it took me 10 minutes to paint the whole model. Maybe 15 if I went back in and did a couple of details here and there. But overall, I'd say for a model that's pretty effective. But if you're going for a super clean look, I would say that this is probably what you're going for, not contrast, going with a typical thing with maybe a wash or a thin down wash, and you'll be a-okay. This lady here, this is another cool thing with contrast, is that you can get really awesome tones with your skirts, drapes, etc. So this is the Amber Clade Posse set from Wild West Exodus, which we have at the store. It's a really great set, awesome models. But as you can see here, this was all done with contrast paints except for the gold. So everything else that I'm working on so far is contrast paints. And honestly, I know you're looking at it zoomed in, but if you're looking at it in person, you're not going to be able to tell that I just used contrast paints simply because of the way that the material works. So I really think one thing that people are going to think about when you're working with these in the future, in future projects and etc., is how much texture do I have? I did a little bit of highlighting on the energy pool there. As you can see, it's not a perfect contrast highlight, but still, overall, I think that's really effective. One thing people had asked me about was how is Gilliman's flesh versus Dark Oath flesh? Because Dark Oath flesh on the sign looks like it could be a lighter tone, and then Gilliman flesh tends to be that Cadian tone / pinker. I have found most success with a washed down Gilliman flesh versus Dark Oath flesh, either washed down or otherwise. It's just me, my personal preference. I like to have that deep recess, because what that does is if I want to highlight the skin even more, I can just pump that up super high, and then I can leave the recesses with that nice, rich, kind of reddish purple tone that Gilliman flesh gives it, versus the Dark Oath flesh, which to me turns out a little too brown. Again, that's me, so that's something to consider if you're going for one of those two flesh tones. I like the Gilliman flesh over Dark Oath, and that's something you probably not hear from most people, which is a-okay. You make the choice. And if you're really going for a dark tan tone, the Fire Slayer works as well. Yeah, and I think that's pretty much it that I need to show you. See if there's anything else. Oh, I did try working on the Deathclaw, and people that ask, sorry, get away from the mic here. People that ask, what is it like with working on a darker tone if you're going from a base coat, which is either a medium gray or a dark? And so let me show you what Wildwood on top of a dark tone looked like. And this ended up looking like this, which is to say not much of anything. It kind of a satiny, muddy mess. But on the top side, I think used Gilliman flesh on top of here, and it turned out really nice. So then the top part of the Deathclaw looks cool, and then the bottom looks like not a whole lot of anything. So I had to figure out if I want to go back in, base coat it before I do the whole contrast thing again. Yeah. Full recommendation for paints, go with your prime colors. If you can, get Talisar blue for the blue. It's a very interesting blue. The darks become a navy blue, and the lights are kind of a icier blue, I guess. It's not quite on the, turquoisey blue side, but it's good. It's a nice one. I like Flesh Terror's red. I like to be able to get deep reds, but I think most people do the Blood Angels red, which is totally fine. And then, yeah, the Skeletal Horde, which is totally necessary for things like this cape there. That is Skeletal Horde. Snakebite Leather, for sure. Wildwood, I love that one. Basilicum Gray or Space Wolves Gray. Space Wolves Gray is actually very useful for metallics. And I wish I had my model out to show you what that looks like. But basically, when you're looking at the Space Wolves versus Basilicum Gray, you can metallicize the Space Wolves Gray into a cooler steel. But if you wanted to, and you didn't want to get both the Basilicum Gray and the Space Wolves Gray, you could just get Space Wolves Gray and then use either Nuln Oil or Agrax Earthshade to neutralize the blue, and then throw your metal on top of it. So there's a little tip for you, tip of the day. And there we go. So that is my guide, or I guess post-hype analysis for contrast paints. They're useful. They are good if you're you're not wanting to spend too much time with your base coat and your wash. If you're not looking for extreme precision in the details, you're willing to have it look a little bit messier. So great for grimy things like flesh, things like skirts, things like this power armor on the Fallout character. If you're looking for a very clean look, probably just go with the traditional coloring. If you're going for something clean, otherwise it's pretty great. I like it. I have used contrast in every single model that I've had since they came out, and I would say that honestly I'm saving a ton of time, and that's the big thing. So you do gray sear, and I like gray sear because it's neutral, and it's actually, I thought that it was like a gray. It is a light gray. I'll see if I can show you here. I'm not sure it's going to show up on camera very well, but this color is almost white. It's not that off-white bone wraith color, that's the other one. It's really close to white. It's not a gray. And so with that, I would literally just get gray sear and then start contrast painting whatever you can, and then edge highlight later if you feel the need to, especially for set pieces and things that you don't need to spend extra time on unless you're looking for maybe a painting award for terrain. But a lot of folks, they're going to be impressed just by the way it looks, and I'm impressed just because I get to save all that time. And yes, that's probably been harped on a million times. I like it. I like it a lot. So post-type analysis, on a 1 to 10, I'm still going to give it, I'm going to give it a 9. Yeah, I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10. Works awesome. Works as intended if your intent is for speed and not the perfect amount of control and precision. Cool. Thanks, everybody. You can pick up paints at Gigabytes Cafe. So if you need some, you just let us know. We're constantly getting orders in pretty much every week since they came out. So then make sure you message us if you want a particular one, and then we'll try to get that for you. Sometimes they don't come in because we ask for certain ones, but most of the time, you're okay. In the meantime, I'm John Caspian for GigaBitesTV. Y'all have a great weekend. Goodbye.